What'd you say?
What were they doing?
We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk, proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off.
I don't know, we've been fighting all morning and he wouldn't let me in the car before.
Why wouldn't he let you in the car?
He told me I need to calm down. Yeah.
And then she had her phone that way. I know I was gonna push, but I just tried to push away. So let's take a little step back. She got
On social media, it looked like a perfect love story. A young couple, Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, trading in their normal lives for the adventure of a lifetime. Their backdrop was the Great American Open Road, all documented in vibrant photos and idyllic videos for a growing online audience. They were selling a dream, hashtag van life, a sun-drenched journey through the country's most stunning national parks. But behind the curated smiles and beautiful scenery, a dark and tragic story was unfolding. The dream wasn't real, and that open road was leading to a dangerous end. How does a dream trip turn into a national tragedy? Police had direct contact with Gabby Petito just weeks before she was gone. So what did they miss? The investigation into Gabby's disappearance became a race against time. But from the very beginning, a series of critical mistakes and missed opportunities may have already sealed her fate. In this video, we'll expose the major errors and ask the question, could her loss have been prevented? It all started on July 2nd, 2021. Gabby Petito and her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, left Florida in a converted white van for a 4-month tour of the American West. Gabby, an aspiring influencer, carefully documented their travels on Instagram and YouTube, sharing posts that painted a picture of a carefree and loving relationship. They hiked through canyons, smiled under desert sunsets, and lived out a fantasy that captivated thousands. But by August, that perfect picture was beginning to fall apart. The first and most critical mistake in this case didn't happen after Gabby disappeared, but weeks before, during a single fateful encounter on a roadside in Utah. On August 12th, 2021, a 911 dispatcher in Moab, Utah, got a chilling call. A witness reported seeing a man, Brian Laundrie, striking and confronting a woman, Gabby Petito, before chasing her down the sidewalk and driving off. It was a clear report of domestic confrontation in progress. This call should have triggered a life-saving intervention. Instead, it became the first in a long line of failures. When Moab police officer Daniel Robbins found the couple's white van, he saw it swerve and hit a curb before he pulled it over. He turned on his body camera, and the footage that followed would become a key piece of evidence, not of a crime, but of a colossal failure in policing. The video shows a visibly distraught Gabby Petito. She's sobbing, struggling to speak, and apologizing over and over. This is where the first major error was made, the misinterpretation of the scene. Despite the 911 call reporting Laundrie as the aggressor, the officers on scene quickly framed the incident around Gabby's emotional state. The police report would later describe the stop not as a domestic confrontation, but as a mental emotional health break. This misclassification would have devastating consequences. Under Utah law, when officers respond to a domestic confrontation call and have probable cause to believe an incident happened, they are required to either make an arrest or issue a citation. But the officers, including a second officer, Eric Pratt, seemed determined to avoid this. They separated Gabby and Brian for interviews. Brian, in stark contrast to Gabby, appeared calm and collected. He had visible scratches on his face, arms, and neck, which he claimed came from Gabby. Gabby admitted to scratching him, explaining she was trying to get him to stop telling her to calm down. This leads to the second critical mistake, the failure to identify the primary aggressor. Domestic confrontation experts will tell you that it's common for victims to act out in self-defense or frustration, and for perpetrators to manipulate police by appearing calm and shifting blame. The officers took Brian at his word. They saw Gabby's emotional state and her admission to scratching Brian as proof that she was the one in control. An independent review of the stop months later stated, "It's very likely Gabby was a long-term victim of domestic confrontation, whether that be physically, mentally, or emotionally." But the officers on that day didn't see the bigger picture. They saw a crying woman and a calm man with scratches, and they made a snap judgment that went against the initial 911 report. The third mistake from this single stop was a complete failure of basic police work. The officers never got a statement from the original 911 caller, the person who reported seeing Brian confront Gabby. They took the word of a second witness who only saw part of the incident and never followed up on the initial explosive report of confrontation. And while they photographed Brian's scratches, they failed to properly document or ask about Gabby's condition. She told them her cheek was sore because Brian had grabbed her face with his hand, a controlling act that was completely downplayed. Instead of an arrest, the officers settled on what they thought was a creative solution, separating the couple for the night. They arranged for Brian to stay in a hotel while Gabby was to take the van. Not only did this decision go against Utah's domestic confrontation statute, but it was a tragically missed opportunity. By failing to act, they left her under his control. An independent review later concluded the officers made several unintentional mistakes, but intentions don't change the outcome. This traffic stop was law enforcement's last clear chance to save Gabby Petito's life, and they drove right past it. After the Moab incident, Gabby and Brian's trip continued. Her social media posts became less frequent, and her family felt a growing sense of unease. Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, said her last confirmed conversation with Gabby was around August 25th, when they talked about heading to Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. Then came a series of strange text messages. On August 27th, a text from Gabby's phone to her mother read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." Nicole Schmidt said her daughter never called her grandfather by his first name. She was immediately worried something was wrong. Another text on August 30th just said, "No service in Yosemite. Investigators now believe Brian Laundrie sent these texts from Gabby's phone to mislead her family and law enforcement into thinking she was still okay." The last credible sighting of Gabby was on August 27th, 2021, near the Spread Creek dispersed camping area in Wyoming. Witnesses later reported seeing the couple in a heated, explosive argument. It's believed Gabby was gone around August 28th. I'm using softened language here because of YouTube's guidelines, but you understand what I mean when I say she was no longer with us. On September 1st, the timeline takes a sinister turn. Brian Laundrie pulled into his parents' driveway in Northport, Florida, driving Gabby's white van. He was alone. He had driven over 30 hours from Wyoming back across the entire country without his fiancée. For 10 days, neither Brian nor his parents said a word to Gabby's family about where she was. They didn't call the police. They didn't answer the frantic calls and texts from the Petito family. This 10-day gap is the next monumental failure in the timeline, a failure not just of law enforcement, but of basic human decency. While Brian and his family stayed silent, Gabby's family was living a nightmare. Finally, on September 11th, after 10 days of being ignored, Nicole Schmidt officially reported her daughter missing. The Northport police in Florida were notified. They went to the Laundrie home where they found Gabby's van, but Brian refused to cooperate. He had already hired a lawyer, and on that lawyer's advice, wouldn't speak to investigators. This is where law enforcement made its next critical mistake. Even though Brian had returned home alone in his missing fiance's van from a trip they took together, and even with his complete refusal to cooperate, police were incredibly slow to act. They didn't have enough evidence to get a search warrant for the Laundrie home for several more days. Brian Laundrie was named a person of interest on September 15th, but he wasn't under surveillance. Police seemed to be treating this as a standard missing person case, not the urgent red flag situation it so clearly was. They didn't have him in their sights, and he was about to slip right through their fingers. On September 17th, the case took another dramatic turn. Brian Laundrie's parents told Northport police they hadn't seen their son since September 14th. They would later change their story, saying he'd actually left on the 13th, giving him an extra day's head start. Brian Laundrie was now officially a missing person himself, and the only person of interest in Gabby's disappearance was gone. A manhunt was on. The search focused on the vast and inhospitable Carlton Reserve, a 25,000-acre wilderness preserve in Florida, where Brian's parents said he'd gone hiking. And here, the investigation stumbled again. The search for Brian was plagued by confusion, missteps, and a critical lack of urgency in the days after he was reported missing. For weeks, law enforcement combed through the alligator and snake-infested swamps of the Carlton Reserve, using drones, dogs, and ATVs. But the search was complicated by the fact that much of the reserve was underwater from recent flooding. After an exhaustive and fruitless initial search, Northport police even announced on September 20th that they were pulling back their search at the reserve, a confusing move that suggested they were out of leads. Meanwhile, the search for Gabby Petito was reaching its tragic end. On September 19th, 21, tipped off by travel bloggers who had spotted Gabby's van in their footage, the FBI discovered human remains in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest. 2 days later, an autopsy confirmed the remains belonged to Gabby Petito. The Teton County coroner later announced what had happened to her. She had experienced restricted breathing and severe damage to her neck area. I have to phrase it this way so the video doesn't get pulled down, but investigators determined this was no accident. Gabby's loss intensified the manhunt for Brian Laundrie. But where was he? The search of the Carlton Reserve had turned up nothing. The public was outraged. How could the only person of interest just walk out of his parents' house and disappear? The answer, it seems, lies in another critical error, a failure of surveillance and communication. For several days, Northport police thought they knew where Brian Laundrie was, but they were wrong. In a now infamous mix-up, police had mistaken Brian's mother, Roberta, for Brian himself. They had watched her leave the family home in a baseball cap and return, believing it was Brian. This massive error meant that for days, while public pressure mounted, police thought they had eyes on him when he was already deep in the Carlton Reserve. It was a catastrophic blunder that gave Brian a crucial head start. The search dragged on for over a month. Finally, on October 20th, 2021, as floodwaters in the reserve receded, some of Brian's personal items were found. Nearby, investigators discovered human remains. Dental records confirmed they belonged to Brian Laundrie. An autopsy later revealed He was no longer living due to a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Near his remains, authorities found a backpack, a handgun, and a waterlogged notebook. After weeks of careful analysis, the FBI recovered some of what Brian had written. It was a confession. In the notebook, Brian Laundrie admitted to taking Gabby Petito's life. He wrote, "I ended her life," in a self-serving story. He claimed Gabby had been in distress after a fall, and that he had ended her life out of what he called mercy. "I thought it was merciful, that it is what she wanted, but I see now all the mistakes I made," he wrote. The confession closed the case, but it did little to answer the burning questions about how the investigation had gone so wrong. In the wake of Gabby's loss, the Moab Police Department faced intense scrutiny. An independent investigation into the August 12th traffic stop was launched. The resulting 102-page report was damning. It concluded the officers made several unintentional mistakes, including failing to issue a citation for domestic confrontation as required by law, and failing to get a statement from the original 911 caller. The report recommended that both officers be placed on probation and get more specialized training in domestic confrontation investigation. Despite the findings, reform has been slow. A year after the review, reports emerged that the Moab Police Department had not fully implemented the recommended changes. In a move that shocked many, one of the officers involved in the stop was later promoted. Gabby's family, determined to get justice, filed a $50 million wrongful loss lawsuit against the Moab Police Department, arguing the officer's negligence directly contributed to what happened to her. The lawsuit claimed that if the officers had been properly trained, they would have recognized the signs of domestic confrontation and intervened. However, in November 2024, a Utah judge dismissed the lawsuit, citing a state law that gives police agencies governmental immunity. Gabby's family has vowed to appeal the decision, and that fight for accountability is still pending. But the fight for change goes beyond the courtroom. Gabby's story has sparked legislative reform. Her parents have become tireless advocates, establishing the Gabby Petito Foundation to raise awareness about domestic confrontations and dangerous relationships. Their advocacy has led to real results. In Florida, a new law known as the Gabby Petito Act went into effect in 2024. Championed by Gabby's father, Joseph Petito, the law requires police officers responding to a domestic confrontation call to ask a specific set of 12 questions to assess a victim's level of danger. This type of lethality assessment is used in other states and includes questions like, "Has the aggressor ever restricted your breathing?" and "Do you believe the aggressor will try to seriously harm you?" Had such a protocol been in place and used in Utah, it's possible officers would have uncovered the truth about Gabby and Brian's relationship. Similar legislation has since been proposed in other states, a direct response to the systemic failures that Gabby's case exposed. The foundation also works to educate people about the warning signs of dangerous relationships. These include excessive control over a partner's activities and communications, isolation from family and friends, extreme jealousy and possessiveness, monitoring of social media and phone usage, threats of harm, and escalating confrontational behavior. Recognizing these patterns can literally save lives. Gabby's case also highlights the dangerous intersection of social media and dangerous relationships. The pressure to maintain a perfect online image can trap victims in situations where they feel they can't reach out for help. Gabby's Instagram posts continued to show a happy couple even as her private messages to friends revealed growing concern and fear. This phenomenon, sometimes called digital hostage taking, is becoming increasingly common as perpetrators use social media as another tool of control. The case also exposed significant gaps in how different law enforcement agencies communicate and coordinate. The Moab Police, Northport Police, and FBI all had pieces of the puzzle, but crucial information wasn't always shared effectively or in a timely manner. This lack of coordination contributed to lost time and missed opportunities throughout the investigation. The intense media coverage and public interest in Gabby's case also demonstrated how social media can both help and hinder investigations. While the widespread sharing of information led to crucial tips from travel bloggers who had captured Gabby's van in their footage, it also created enormous pressure on law enforcement and sometimes spread misinformation that complicated the search efforts. The story of Gabby Petito is a heartbreaking picture of a vibrant life cut short, a social media fantasy that hid a dark reality, and a series of devastating mistakes that had fatal consequences. Every error, from the misjudged traffic stop in Moab to the botched surveillance in Florida, was a link in a chain of failures that allowed the person responsible to slip away and a young woman to lose her life. The misclassification of a domestic confrontation incident as a mental health crisis, the failure to follow legal protocols, the 10 days of silence, and the bungled manhunt, all of these were missed opportunities to intervene. They highlight a desperate need for better training, stricter protocols, and a deeper understanding of dangerous relationships within our law enforcement agencies. The case serves as a stark reminder that what we see on social media is often a carefully curated version of reality. Behind the beautiful photos and happy captions, someone may be crying out for help in ways we don't recognize. It reminds us to check on our loved ones, to look beyond the surface, and to trust our instincts when something seems wrong. The changes to domestic confrontation laws are a start, driven by the relentless advocacy of Gabby's family. But real change requires all of us to be more aware. If you or someone you know is experiencing a dangerous relationship, please know there is help. We've included links to resources in the description below, including the National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-7233 and text line, text start to 88788. These services are free, confidential, and available 24/7. Sharing this information could save a life. Learning the signs of dangerous relationships is a debt we all owe to Gabby Petito's memory. We can also support organizations working to address these issues, advocate for better training for law enforcement, and push for legislative changes that protect vulnerable people. Her story ended in tragedy, but her legacy can be one of change, a legacy that protects the vulnerable, holds institutions accountable, and ensures that the next time a young woman is crying for help on the side of a road, her voice is finally heard. Gabby Petito's name will be remembered not just for how her life ended, but for the changes her story inspired and the lives those changes will save.